Between 1929 and 1939, a staggering 15 million Americans found themselves out of a job as the unemployment rate soared to an unbelievable 25%. The very banks people had trusted with their life savings were collapsing at a rate of 600 per year. More than 2 million Americans became homeless, left to wander the vast country in a desperate search for work that had all but vanished. They needed a new set of skills, survival techniques that could keep them alive without spending a single penny. They had to learn methods to find food when grocery stores were a distant dream, and the soup kitchens were completely overwhelmed. This is what life was truly like for America's hobos during the most devastating economic collapse in modern history. So yeah, if these stories connect with you, please subscribe. And I'm always curious, what time is it where you are right now? Let me know in the comments. Just last week, someone from Canada mentioned they listened during their lunch breaks. I'm not judging, I just really wasn't expecting that. Okay, tonight we're diving into the world of the Great Depression era hobos. But before we get into it, get comfortable. I mean, really comfortable. Grab your pillows, good. Get your blanket situation handled, perfect. You're going to want to trust me on this one. The morning sun cast long, stretching shadows across Chicago's financial district on October 29, 1929. Your eyes fluttered open to what would be the worst day of your life, but you just didn't know it yet. The crisp cotton sheets of your modest apartment bed felt cool and clean against your skin, a world away from where you'd find yourself sleeping in just a week. James Sullivan, and that's you, had exactly 8 hours of a normal life left. You straightened your tie, grabbed your well-worn briefcase, and headed out to the bank where you had worked diligently for the past 6 years. Your savings account held a respectable $4. Your rent was paid all the way through November, which was a small comfort. You even had a girl you were seriously thinking about proposing to before the sun went down. But none of that was going to matter. Black Tuesday, that's what they would call it later on. For now, though, it was just a whirlwind of confusion, sheer panic, and utter disbelief. Sullivan, have you seen these numbers? Your boss's face was as white as a sheet, with beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the autumn chill in the air. It's all going, he stammered everything. The stock ticker relentlessly told the story with its cold, clicking precision. Fortunes were just evaporating into thin air, and entire life savings were disappearing in moments. Your bank wasn't just losing money, it was dying right there in front of your very eyes. What do we do? You asked, your voice barely a whisper, but he was already grabbing his coat, his movements frantic. There's nothing to do, he said, his voice hollow and empty. It's over. By noon, a massive crowd had formed outside, a sea of anxious faces. People wanted their money, all of them, all at once. The math was simple and it was brutal. There just wasn't enough cash to go around, not even close. I'm sorry, sir, the bank is temporarily closed. You found yourself telling an elderly man who was shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. That's my life in there, he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. And you had no answer for him, because your life was in there too. 2 weeks later, you were sitting on your apartment stoop with a single small suitcase by your side. The eviction notice was a crumpled ball in your pocket, a harsh reminder of your new reality. The woman who would have been your fiancée had already left town, moving back in with her parents. This was happening everywhere to everyone. You weren't special in your suffering. You heading west. A man sitting next to you asked. He was a stranger with weathered skin and eyes that held a certain calm. He didn't look homeless, but there was something about him, a knowing look like he'd seen all of this unfold before. I don't know where I'm heading, you admitted, the words tasting like defeat. The name's Jack, he said, offering a hand that was calloused but surprisingly clean. Some folks call me Frying Pan Jack. Been riding the rails since 25. You look like you could use some schooling. And that's how James Boston Jim Sullivan, a former bank teller who was now homeless, received his very first lesson in the art of hobo survival. The thing about becoming a hobo in 1929 was this: you were far from alone. The streets were filling up with former businessmen, factory workers, teachers, people who had done everything right until the world decided that right wasn't working anymore. The first rule, Jack said as you walked together toward the rail yard, is to forget everything you think you know about surviving. Money is worthless if you don't have any, and you, my friend, don't. Your stomach growled loudly, emphasizing his point perfectly. You hadn't eaten a single thing since yesterday morning. You're thinking about food all wrong, Jack told you, his tone patient. Everyone is. They're looking at grocery stores and restaurants as places where you buy food. We see them as places that throw away food, perfectly good food. I know what you're thinking right now, dumpster diving. It sounds gross, but here's where it starts to get interesting. This isn't just random scavenging. This is a system, a science. Jack called it dumpster archaeology. Bakeries dump their day-old bread at 6 a.m. sharp, he explained, pulling out a hand-drawn chart marked up with times and locations. It was more detailed than some military operations I've seen. Restaurants scrape their plates between 2 and 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and then again between 9 and 11 at night. Grocery stores discard their old produce every Tuesday and Friday right at closing time. You were completely stunned by the precision, the sheer methodology of it all. This wasn't desperate scrabbling in the dark. It was calculated food procurement. Wait, you said, trying to process it all. You've mapped out every single food disposal schedule within what? A 5-mile radius of the rail yard. Jack just grinned. 5 miles is about right walking distance. We don't waste energy and we don't waste time. Time is the one thing we've got plenty of, but energy, that's precious, especially when you're hungry. By November, you've somehow made it all the way to Bakersfield, California. The weather was certainly better, but hunger feels the same no matter where you are. You had lost 15 pounds and gained 1,000 miles of hard, grueling travel. Jack was still with you, and he was about to demonstrate your first real hobo food procurement lesson. Watch and learn, he said, positioning himself outside a small restaurant. It was 8:45 p.m. and the place was set to close at 9. Timing, he stressed, is everything. Jack straightened his patched but clean shirt and smoothed down his hair with his hands. He looked respectable, not wealthy, but not desperate either. This, you would soon learn, was absolutely crucial. Wait here, he instructed. Watch how I walk in, not through the front, never through the front. You watched as Jack circled around to the back door, where a young man was already taking out the trash for the night. Jack's approach was careful and measured. He waited until the kitchen worker made eye contact with him before he spoke. "Good evening, sir," Jack said, his voice clear and full of dignity. I'm traveling through just looking for work. Would you happen to have any food that's just going to waste that I could take with me?" The phrasing was masterful. He wasn't begging, he was offering to solve a problem, waste disposal, all while maintaining his own dignity. The kitchen worker hesitated for a moment, then just shrugged his shoulders. "Chef was going to toss these," he said, holding out a bundle wrapped in newspaper. "It's a couple of chicken legs and some potatoes, not much." "That's very kind of you," Jack said, accepting the package as if it were a completely reasonable business transaction. "Thank you." As you walked away, Jack explained the strategy. 7 out of 10 times that works. The key is looking clean, being polite, and hitting them at just the right time, when they're closing up, but before the food actually gets tossed into the garbage. Nobody wants to be the person who throws food in a trash can while a hungry person is standing there watching. It makes them feel bad. That bundle of chicken and potatoes was an absolute feast. You and Jack ate sitting on your coats near the rail yard, watching the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. "What about when that doesn't work?" You asked between mouthfuls. "Then we move on to Plan B, the dumpster archaeology system." Jack's demeanor became serious. This is where most beginners make fatal mistakes. They just grab whatever looks edible. That's how you get sick, and that's how you die. Survival as a hobo isn't just about finding food, it's about finding safe food. There's a science to it. Bread that's hard but not moldy is good. Produce with surface blemishes but solid flesh is good. Canned goods with dented containers but intact seals are good, Jack explained methodically. Meat that's older than 4 hours is bad. Dairy without any refrigeration is bad. Anything with visible mold or an unusual odor is very bad. The rules were strict because the consequences were severe. There are no hospitals for hobos, no sick days, no one to take care of you if a bout of food poisoning hits. "Boston Jim," Jack said, and the nickname had stuck by now. "I've seen men die from eating the wrong piece of garbage. It's just not worth the risk." Your education continued right through November and into December. You learned about food caches, which were hidden storage systems near major rail junctions where non-perishable items could be stored for future use. Never keep all your food in one place, Jack advised as you helped him construct a small cache under a railroad bridge. You were using a discarded oil drum with a tight-fitting lid that you waterproofed with tar. Stash small amounts in multiple locations. Someone might find one of them, but they won't find them all. Inside the drum went hardtack crackers, dried beans, salt, and a small portion of preserved meat. It was enough to sustain one person for almost a week. "I've got 8 of these between here and Portland," Jack said with a clear sense of pride. They're never more than 2 days' travel apart. The system was starting to become clear to you. Hobo survival wasn't about day-to-day scavenging at all. It was about planning, strategy, and creating entire networks of resources. By January of 1930, you'd learned perhaps the most surprising food procurement method of all, urban foraging. Jack took you to an abandoned lot near the rail yard. "Cities are full of food that people don't even recognize," he said, pointing to various plants. Dandelion greens are good from March through November. You can smell the wild onions. Purslane, that succulent plant right there, is high in omega-3 fatty acids. You couldn't help but laugh in disbelief. "You sound like a damn botanist." Jack just shrugged. "I studied to be one, actually. Then the war came and then the economy collapsed. Now I'm just a different kind of expert. He showed you how acorns could be processed into flour by grinding them and leaching them with water for 24 hours to remove the bitter tannins. He also showed you how cattail roots could be harvested from roadside ditches and then roasted for carbohydrates. Most people are so disconnected from where their food actually comes from, Jack said, that they're starving in the middle of potential meals. The plants growing up through the sidewalk cracks, the seeds falling from the city trees, that's survival. February brought you to your very first hobo jungle, which was the name for the encampments near rail yards where travelers would gather. Here, you witnessed the absolute pinnacle of hobo food preparation, the Mulligan stew system. In a clearing surrounded by makeshift shelters, a group of about 10 men and 2 women were gathered around a large pot, a discarded oil drum with the top cut off. Everyone had contributed something to the pot: wilted vegetables, a handful of beans, a few potatoes, a small piece of meat of questionable origin. Mulligan stew, Jack explained, is community cooking. Everyone puts in whatever they've got and everyone gets a portion. It's democracy in a pot. The cooking process was slow and methodical. A low fire was maintained for 3 hours, and the stew was stirred every 15 minutes to keep it from burning. The aroma was surprisingly good, and when your portion finally came, measured out carefully according to what you had contributed, it was the most satisfying meal you'd had in months. How do you prevent someone from just taking more than their fair share? You asked an older hobo who seemed to be supervising the distribution. Try it and find out, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Hobo justice is swift. You steal food from hungry men, you won't be welcome in any jungle from here to New York. Word travels on the rails faster than the trains themselves. And that's when you started to understand the most critical aspect of hobo survival. It wasn't just about individual techniques. It was about community systems, about collective knowledge passed down from the veterans to the newcomers. As March arrived, you'd mastered the basics of food procurement. You could identify which restaurants were likely to be generous at closing time. You knew which dumpsters were safe and when they were usually filled. You could even spot edible plants in vacant lots that most people would walk right past without a second glance. "You're getting good at this, Boston Jim," Jack said one evening as you shared a meal of foraged greens and salvaged bread. But food's just the beginning. Winter's ending, which means we can start thinking about more permanent shelter, and I know just the man to teach you. "Who's that?" you asked. "They call him Boxcar Willie, best shelter builder on the Western rails. Last I heard, he was down in Fresno building a place that could withstand anything short of a tornado. When do we leave?" Jack grinned. "First train heading south after midnight. Speaking of which, I suppose it's time you learned proper train hopping technique, too." Your stomach tightened with a knot of anxiety. You'd ridden a few trains with Jack already, but always with his guidance, always on slow-moving local trains that were easy to board and exit. "Don't worry," he said, reading the expression on your face. "We'll start small, but by the time we reach Willie, you'll know enough to stay alive on the rails." As you prepared your few possessions for the journey, you reflected on how much your life had changed in just a few short months. From a bank teller to a hobo. From someone who worried about stock prices to someone who could spot edible plants in an empty lot. From a man who feared the shame of poverty to someone who now understood there's a certain dignity in survival. The sun set over Bakersfield, and you found yourself feeling oddly at peace. You were hungry, yes, and certainly homeless, but you were no longer helpless. Jack had given you something far more valuable than food. He'd given you a system for finding it yourself. Tomorrow, you'd head south to learn about shelter from Boxcar Willie. But tonight, with a full stomach and a clear plan for tomorrow, you slept better than any former banker had a right to in these hardest of times. The hobo way wasn't just about surviving. It was about surviving with purpose, with knowledge, and with community. And as you drifted off to sleep, the distant whistle of a southbound freight train called to you like a promise. There were more lessons ahead, more systems to master. But for now, your belly was full, and the stars above the rail yard shone like silver dimes scattered across the dark heavens. In a world where money had failed millions, you were learning a wealth of a different kind. The freight train's headlight cut through the pre-dawn fog like a dull, searching knife. You and Jack were crouched behind a water tower at the southern edge of the Bakersfield rail yard. It was March of 1930, and the night air still carried the sharp bite of winter. "Remember what I told you," Jack whispered, his voice low. "Wait until it's moving about as fast as a man can run. Too slow and the yard bulls might spot us. Too fast and you'll end up right under the wheels." Your mouth was completely dry. Train hopping wasn't just a form of transportation for hobos. It was the difference between life and death. It meant covering hundreds of miles or being stuck in a town where there was no work and no food. "Which car?" you asked, your eyes fixed on the slow-moving behemoth as it steadily built up speed. "Third boxcar from the end. The doors are open on the far side. We'll run parallel to it, then cut across when we hit that switch tower." The train groaned and shuddered as it accelerated, and your heart hammered against your ribs. "Now," Jack shouted, breaking into a full sprint. You followed close behind, your legs pumping hard, your eyes fixed on the passing boxcars as gravel crunched under your worn-out shoes. The train was moving faster than it looked, maybe 12 miles per hour, and it was still picking up speed. Jack reached the tracks first, perfectly timing his approach and grabbing onto a ladder rung. In one smooth, fluid motion, he swung himself up and onto the small platform. He turned, extending his hand toward you. "Commit," he yelled over the train's deafening roar. "Don't hesitate." You were running full out now, your lungs burning with the effort. The ladder was coming up fast, almost too fast. Your hand reached out, missed, then reached again, this time connecting. Jack grabbed your wrist and pulled with surprising strength. Your feet left the ground, and for one terrifying moment, you were suspended between the earth and the cold, hard steel. Then you were on, your heart pounding, adrenaline surging through your veins. Jack was grinning from ear to ear. "Congratulations, Boston Jim. You've just joined the fraternity of the high iron." The interior of the boxcar smelled of dust and old timber. 2 other men were already inside, huddled in the corners with their small bundles. They nodded a silent greeting but didn't speak. Territory was established with the eyes, not with words. "Rule 1 of riding," Jack said quietly as you settled against the wall, "is respect. That's their space, this is ours. Rule 2 is silence when you need it. Bulls check the cars at stops, and talking is what gets you caught. You learned more rules as the night unfolded into day. You learned which cars were the safest. Empty boxcars, yes, and sometimes refrigerator cars, but never coal cars. You learned how to read the rhythms of a moving train to predict its stops. You learned the subtle difference between the sound of a regular halt and one where railroad police might be lying in wait. What happens if they catch you? You asked. Jack's face darkened a little. Depends on the bull. Some just kick you off. Others, he rubbed an old scar on his forearm. Others make sure you remember not to come back. Dawn broke as the train rolled through California's Central Valley. Fields stretched out to the horizon, green with the first growth of early spring. In another life, you might have admired the view. Now you were assessing it for its survival potential. Which of those fields might need harvest workers? Which farms might have sympathetic owners? Where could you possibly find water? Fresno is coming up, Jack said, peering out through the boxcar door. We'll jump about a mile out. The yards are hot there, way too many bulls. Jumping from a moving train, you soon discovered, was both simpler and more terrifying than boarding one. Jack demonstrated the technique. Wait until the train slows on an uphill grade. Look for soft ground. Toss your bundle first, then jump with your knees bent, rolling as you hit the ground. Your landing was much less graceful. The impact knocked the wind clean out of your lungs, and you tasted dirt and a little blood where you'd bitten your lip. But you were intact with nothing broken. Jack helped you up, brushing the dust from your clothes. Not bad for a former banker, he said with a slight smile. You'll get smoother with practice, assuming you survive that long. It was a 2-mile walk to the Fresno rail yard in the hobo jungle that had sprouted up nearby. You passed through almond orchards, their branches heavy with delicate pink and white blossoms. The air smelled sweet, a stark contrast to the diesel and creosote of the rail yard. Willie's place is near the jungle, but not in it, Jack explained. He likes his privacy. Been building his setup for almost 3 years now. 3 years in one place. I thought hobos kept moving. Most do. Some find a good spot and stay a while. It all depends on the local law, the work situation, and how well you can hide yourself. The hobo jungle first appeared as thin wisps of cooking smoke rising above a stand of cottonwood trees near a creek. As you got closer, you began to spot the makeshift shelters scattered among the trees. Tents made of canvas and tar paper, lean-tos built against fallen logs, and even a few structures that looked almost like proper cabins. About 30 people were visible, mostly men, with a few women and even a couple of children among them. They were cooking, mending their clothes, playing cards. It looked surprisingly almost normal, like a very poor and very improvised village. "Ho, the camp," Jack called out as you approached. No one seemed alarmed by your presence. A few nodded in recognition. "Jack, you ugly son of a gun." A tall man with a gray-streaked beard strode forward to greet him. "I thought you were headed up to Seattle." "Change of plans, Doc." "This here's Boston Jim. He's new to the road and looking for Willie." Doc gave you an appraising look. "Another banker," he guessed. "Bank teller," you corrected, wondering how he knew. "Your hands," Doc explained matter-of-factly. "They're soft. You'll either toughen them up or die trying." He gestured toward a path leading away from the main camp. "Willie's around the bend by the old equipment shed. Built himself a regular palace. The crazy bastard actually thinks he's staying." The path wound through some scrubby undergrowth before opening onto a small clearing. And there, against the backdrop of an abandoned railroad equipment shed, stood the most ingenious structure you had seen since losing your apartment. It wasn't large, maybe 8 feet by 12, but it was built with a precision and attention to detail that spoke of permanence. The foundation was raised up on railroad ties. The walls were a patchwork of different materials that somehow formed a cohesive whole. A peaked roof, crowned with a small stovepipe, completed the unlikely-looking home. A man emerged from the doorway. He was broad-shouldered, weathered, with intelligent eyes that assessed you immediately. He wore clean but patched overalls and carried himself with a quiet confidence. "Jack," he said, nodding a greeting. "Who's the tenderfoot?" "Boston Jim Sullivan, meet Boxcar Willie, the best shelter man on the Western rails." Willie's handshake was firm and calloused. "Former life?" he asked simply. "Bank teller until last October." He nodded, showing no surprise, no judgment. "The crash got a lot of boys. You sticking with Jack, teaching him the systems," Jack explained. "We did food. I thought you might show him shelter." Willie considered this for a moment, then nodded again. "I could use some help with the north wall reinforcement. Anyway, you might as well learn by doing." And just like that, your education in hobo shelter construction began. Willie's first lesson was surprising. It wasn't about building materials or techniques, but about location. "Site selection," he said, walking you around his small domain, "is the difference between a shelter that lasts 3 years and one that doesn't survive its first storm." He pointed out 3 critical factors that you would never have considered. First was drainage. His site sat a good 18 inches above the surrounding ground, which prevented flooding. Second was wind protection. The large equipment shed blocked the prevailing winds from the north and west. Third was concealment. The shelter was completely invisible from both the rail line and the main road, but it was accessible through hidden paths. "Most folks," Willie explained, "just build wherever is convenient. Then they get flooded out, blown apart, or roused by the law. A smart hobo spends 3 days finding the right spot, then he builds. A dumb one spends 3 hours building, then loses everything in the first rain." The foundation, you learned, was equally critical. Willie had arranged railroad ties in a rectangular frame, with smaller pieces of wood and metal filling the gaps. This raised the living space above the ground moisture and also provided storage space underneath. "Watch for vermin," he warned. "Rats love the spaces under shelters. I keep my food in metal containers and hang them from the center beam. Rats can't climb smooth metal." The wall construction revealed an engineering mindset you wouldn't have expected from a transient worker. Willie called it scrap layering, multiple materials arranged in specific sequences for maximum insulation and weatherproofing. The inner layer, he demonstrated, peeling back a section of the wall, is flattened cardboard boxes, overlapped like shingles to shed any water that gets through the outer layers. The middle layer uses newspaper and rags stuffed into all the gaps for insulation. The outer layer combines sheet metal, tar paper, and canvas, all salvaged from construction sites and dumps. You collecting stuff for these walls? A passing hobo called out, seeing you and Willie examining some discarded materials near the rail yard that afternoon. Teaching the banker about thermal management, Willie replied. "Banker." The man laughed. "Good luck with that. Those boys couldn't build a sandwich, let alone a shelter. "I was just a teller," you protested, but he was already walking away. "Don't mind Hank," Willie said. "He lost his farm to a bank foreclosure. He's still sore about it." "Were you always a builder?" you asked as you helped him carry a large sheet of corrugated metal back to the shelter site. Willie's expression shifted subtly. "An engineer, actually, for the Denver Pacific Railroad. I designed bridges and trestles from Colorado all the way to California." He paused for a moment. Then the consolidation came. Southern Pacific bought the line and brought in their own people. 22 years of service ended with a handshake and 2 weeks' pay. "Christ," you muttered. "What year was that?" 26, before the big crash. I was just ahead of the curve." He tapped the metal sheet. "Now I build smaller projects." Over the next week, you helped Willie reinforce his north wall against the coming spring storms. The work was methodical, precise. Every single material had a purpose, and every technique addressed a specific challenge: water penetration, heat loss, structural integrity. The roof system, Willie explained, is the most critical component. His was peaked, constructed from 2x4s salvaged from demolished buildings. The rafters were spaced 24 inches apart for optimal support, covered with overlapping layers of tar paper, secured with roofing nails, and sealed with tar collected from road repair sites. "Where do you get the nails?" you asked, noticing they were all nearly identical. "Construction site down by the new courthouse. The workers drop more than they use. I go by at night with a magnet on a stick. I've got about 5 pounds of nails that way." Even the rainwater management was sophisticated. A simple gutter system made from split tin cans directed water away from the foundation and into a collection barrel. "Clean water's as valuable as gold," Willie noted. "This barrel fills up in one good rain and lasts me 2 weeks if I'm careful." The interior revealed the true genius of Willie's design. A small wood-burning stove, constructed from a large tin can, sat in the center of the space with a chimney pipe extending up through the roof. Around it, large tin cans filled with sand formed a ring. "Thermal mass," Willie explained. "I heat these up during the evening fire. The sand holds heat for 6 to 8 hours after the fire dies out. It keeps the temperature comfortable through the night without wasting fuel." Ventilation holes near the floor and ceiling created air circulation while preventing carbon monoxide buildup, a silent killer in many improvised shelters. "We lost 2 good men last winter," Jack commented soberly. "They built their shelter too tight, with no ventilation. They went to sleep and never woke up." "Carbon monoxide's got no smell," Willie added. "By the time you notice something's wrong, you're too confused to do anything about it." The sleeping area was another marvel of efficiency. Rather than a bed that took up permanent space, Willie had built a platform that folded down from the wall, supported by legs that slotted into holes in the floor. During the daytime, it was up and out of the way. At nighttime, it became a bed. The blankets and bedding were stored in a wall compartment. You were most impressed by the hidden storage systems. Willie had constructed a false floor with concealed compartments for valuables, tools, and food supplies. The entrance was disguised with natural materials and positioned to be invisible from casual observation. "You expecting thieves out here?" you asked, watching him secure a small bundle of tools in one of the hidden spaces. "Always plan for the worst," Willie said simply. "Out here, your tools are your life. Lose them, and you're starting from nothing all over again. Even security had been considered. A simple alarm system using tin cans and string surrounded the perimeter of his small property. It doesn't stop anyone who's determined, Willie admitted, but it warns me if someone's approaching. That's usually enough time to decide if they're friendly or not. On your 5th day with Willie, a spring storm rolled in from the Pacific. The sky turned a dark charcoal, and the wind whipped through the trees surrounding the jungle. Most hobo shelters were hastily reinforced or abandoned entirely, as their occupants sought refuge in the equipment shed or under the nearby rail bridge. Willie watched the approaching storm with a calm interest. It's a good test for our north wall reinforcement. Inside his shelter, the contrast with the chaos outside was startling. While rain hammered against the roof and the wind howled around the corners, the interior remained dry and surprisingly warm. The stove glowed red, heating the sand-filled cans. The air smelled of pine from the burning scrap wood. "Not bad," Jack said, sprawled on a bench built into the wall. "Not bad at all, Willie." You found yourself agreeing. The tiny shelter felt more secure than your old apartment building did during a storm. More thought had gone into every single square inch of this place than most conventional homes. Ever think about going back? You asked Willie as the storm raged outside. You know, using your engineering skills again. Willie's laugh was without bitterness. Who's hearing 50-year-old engineers when college boys will work for half the pay? "Nah, this is my life now," he said, gesturing around the shelter. "Besides, I still am engineering, just with different materials." The storm continued on through the night. You slept better than you had in months. The combination of hard physical labor and a secure shelter produced a deep, restful slumber. In the morning, you stepped outside to survey the damage. The hobo jungle had been hit hard. Several shelters had collapsed entirely. Others leaned drunkenly, their hasty construction no match for the wind and rain. People were already rebuilding, salvaging what materials they could. Willie's shelter stood completely untouched, not even a single leak. "That's the difference," Jack said, coming to stand beside you. "Systems versus shortcuts. Most of these folks will rebuild the same way, get knocked down by the next storm, and then just rebuild again. Willie built once, built it right, and now he sleeps dry every night." Later that day, after helping several jungle residents recover materials from their damaged shelters, Willie took you on a tour of the more sophisticated community structures in the main camp. The communal kitchen was impressively organized. A cooking area was protected by a tarpaulin roof with a clay oven built into a small hillside. Several women were already at work there, preparing a communal meal from whatever ingredients had been gathered. "The kitchen's always in the center of camp," Willie explained. "It's the heart of the community. It also means the valuable food stores are surrounded by people at all times. There was a tool-sharing station where implements could be borrowed and returned. An improvised message board made from a salvaged cabinet door displayed information about local work opportunities, warnings about hostile police or railroad bulls, and notices about which towns were hobo-friendly and which should be avoided. The most impressive community feature was the water purification system, a series of barrels through which rainwater and creek water passed, filtered through layers of sand, charcoal, and fabric. Doc's design, Willie explained. He was a medic in the war. Says most hobo sickness comes from bad water. This system's cut illness in the camp by half, he figures. As evening approached, you helped Willie seal the final sections of his reinforced north wall. The work was satisfying in a way your bank job never was, immediate, tangible, and directly connected to survival. You're a quick study, Willie said as you applied the last of the tar to seal a seam. Were you an engineer in another life? Just a teller, you replied, but I'm learning. Jack approached as you finished, his face serious. It's time to think about moving on, Boston Jim. I got word the fruit orchards up north are starting to hire. If we wait too long, all the spots will be filled. You looked at the shelter you'd helped improve, feeling oddly reluctant to leave. When? Midnight train to Sacramento, then east to the orchards. Willie nodded in understanding. Shelter's good, but work is better. Go make some money while you can. That night, as you gathered your few possessions, Willie presented you with a small notebook. Its cover was made from waxed canvas. Shelter locations, he explained. Every good spot I've built or found from here to Chicago. Which creeks don't dry up in the summer, which rail yards have the fewest bulls, where to find building materials in 20 different cities. You were stunned by the gift. Willie, I can't take your notebook. I'm not giving it away, just lending it. Find me in Tucson next winter and bring it back. Maybe add some spots of your own. You tucked the notebook carefully into your inner coat pocket, next to your most valuable possession, a small photograph of your parents. Everything else you owned fit into a small pack. As midnight approached, you and Jack prepared to head to the rail yard. Willie walked with you to the edge of the jungle. Remember, he said as parting advice, building fast gets you covered for tonight. Building right keeps you alive through the winter. And always check your ventilation. A fire's a friend until it's not. You thanked him, knowing the shelter knowledge he'd shared might literally save your life in the months ahead. Jack clapped Willie on the shoulder. See you down the line, you crazy builder. Stay off the high iron and lightning, Willie replied, a hobo farewell that doubled as practical advice. As you walked toward the rail yard under a clearing sky filled with stars, you reflected on how much you'd learned in such a short time. From food procurement with Jack to shelter construction with Willie, you were acquiring survival systems that worked without money, without any conventional resources. Where to next? You asked Jack as the lights of the rail yard came into view. North to the orchards for work, he said. Then east. I know a fellow in Kansas City, Railroad Pete. He's the best train man on the lines. If you think what you've learned so far is something, wait till you see Pete's transportation network. That man can get from coast to coast without spending a dime or getting caught once. Well, we need to pay him for teaching. You asked, thinking of the few coins in your pocket, your entire worldly wealth. Jack laughed. Pete doesn't want money. He wants knowledge. Routes, schedules, bull patterns. Information's the real currency out here, Boston Jim. And after what Willie taught you about shelter spots, Pete will consider that payment enough. Ahead, a locomotive's headlight flared to life in the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a switch clanked into position. Your next lesson awaited you on steel rails pointed toward the endless horizon. The apple orchard stretched across the rolling hills outside of Sacramento. The trees were heavy with white blossoms that drifted down like soft snow whenever the wind blew. It was April of 1930, and you'd been picking for 3 weeks straight. Your hands, once soft from counting other people's money, were now calloused and stained from the work. Your skin had darkened under the relentless California sun. You and Jack weren't the only former city men working in the orchards. There was a professor from Chicago, a car salesman from Detroit, a printer from New York, all of them set adrift in the collapsing economy, all following the ripening harvest for daily wages. 5 more days, Jack said as you both walked back to the workers' camp after a grueling 12-hour day. Then the pruning's done and they'll cut the crew by half. Are we staying? You asked, though you already knew the answer. Nah. Pete sent word he's in Kansas City for the month. It's a good time to head east if we want to learn the rail system properly. The workers' camp was a collection of canvas tents and improvised shelters on the very edge of the orchard. You'd built a small linta using the techniques Willie had taught you. It had a raised floor, proper drainage, and cross-ventilation. It was nothing like Willie's masterpiece, but it kept you dry during the spring rains. Other workers had taken notice. A young man named Tucker approached as you started your small cooking fire. Say, Boston, he said, and everyone used your hobo name now. Do you think you could show me how to fix my tent? It leaks something awful when it rains. You found yourself explaining Willie's principles of site selection, layered materials, and water flow management. Tucker listened intently, clearly filing away information that might keep him alive in the months to come. Thanks, he said when you'd finished. I've been soaked 3 nights running. Where'd you learn all this? A guy named Boxcar Willie down in Fresno. Tucker nodded. I've heard of him. They say his place could survive a tornado. This was how knowledge spread in hobo society from person to person, from camp to camp. It was practical wisdom passed along like currency. There were no schools, no books, just hard-won experience shared with those who needed it. You'd managed to save $14 from your orchard work, which was a fortune in hobo terms. Most of it was sewn into a hidden pocket that Jack had shown you how to create inside your jacket. Just enough was kept accessible for any immediate needs. Money is useful when you have it, Jack had advised, but never rely on it. Systems work whether you've got cash or not. On your last night at the orchard, you shared a meal with Tucker and 2 other workers. The conversation turned to travel plans. I'm thinking about Chicago, Tucker said. My sister's there and might have a place for me. How are you getting there? You asked. Tucker shrugged. The same way I got here. Freight hopping when I can, walking when I can't, paying for a bus if I'm flush with cash. Jack exchanged a quick glance with you. Could be. We're headed that way too after Kansas City. I've never jumped a train, one of the other workers admitted. I'm scared of it, to be honest. It's not something to take lightly, Jack said seriously. Men die under the wheels every single day. But if you're willing to learn, we're connecting with someone who knows the routes better than anyone. By dawn, your small group had grown to 5. You, Jack, Tucker, and 2 brothers from Oklahoma named Elma and Ray. You were all headed east, and all willing to learn the transportation network from Railroad Pete. The journey to Kansas City took 11 long days. Jack led the way, teaching the basics of safe train hopping as you went. The lessons were practical and immediate. How to identify a train's likely destination by its cargo and direction, and how to time your boarding when the train was moving at the perfect speed, fast enough to clear the yard quickly, but slow enough to grab on safely. You learned which cars to avoid. The loaded gondolas where shifting cargo could crush you, the tankers with no safe riding spots, and the auto-rack cars where the railroad bulls always looked first. You crossed the Rockies on a lumber train, huddled in a small space between crates of raw pine. The thin mountain air made breathing difficult, and the nighttime temperatures dropped below freezing, even though it was late April. "Stay awake," Jack warned as one of the Oklahoma brothers began to doze off. "If you fall asleep up here in the open, you might not wake up." Nebraska brought endless plains and a new challenge. A train with no boxcars, only flat cars loaded with farm equipment. You rode between a tractor and a thresher, completely exposed to the sun and wind, using ropes to secure yourselves during sharp turns. By the time you reached the outskirts of Kansas City, you had all mastered basic train hopping. But as Jack reminded you, what we know is kindergarten. Pete's got the doctoral degree in riding the rails. The Kansas City rail yard was enormous, one of the biggest switching points in the entire country, where trains from all directions met, broke apart, and reformed for new destinations. Finding one man here seemed impossible until Jack led you to a small fire burning under a viaduct near the western edge of the yard. 3 men were sitting around the flames. One of them looked up as you approached, his weathered face breaking into a wide grin. "Jack, you old rail wolf. You brought me some students, I see." Railroad Pete didn't look like a master of anything. He was small, maybe 5'6", with a thin frame and clothes that had seen better decades. But his eyes were sharp and alert, missing nothing, and they suggested a different story. "Boston Jim," Jack introduced you. "He's a former banker and a quick learner." "Banker, huh?" Pete seemed amused. "Well, the rails don't care what you did before, only what you know now." The introductions continued around the circle. Besides Pete, there was a former factory worker called Detroit Slim, and an older man everyone addressed only as Professor, though what he had taught and where remained unclear. "Pete's been riding since he was 15, Jack told your group. He knows every line from the Pacific to the Atlantic." Pete just waved this off. "I'm just a hobo with a good memory." "Now who's looking to learn the system proper?" All 5 of you raised your hands. "Good," Pete said. "The first lessons are tomorrow. Daylight's better for seeing what'll kill you." He gestured to the open spaces around the fire. "Get some sleep." Dawn came early in the rail yard. Railroad Pete's first lesson began well before sunrise. He led you through the pre-dawn darkness to a small hill overlooking the rail yard. "Watch," he said simply, as the yard slowly came to life. For 2 hours, you observed the intricate ballet of locomotives and cars. Pete narrated quietly, explaining what each movement meant, which trains were being built for which destinations, and how to identify local switches versus long-haul freights. He taught you the rhythm of yard operations. "Most hobos just see trains," Pete explained. "I see schedules, patterns, a transportation network with rules as fixed as city bus routes. If you know the patterns, you can get anywhere." He produced a notebook filled with meticulous records, train numbers, departure times, crew change points, and security patterns. It was as detailed as a railroad employee's manual. Westbound freights leave Kansas City at 6:15 a.m., 2:30 p.m., and 11:45 p.m. daily, he explained. The evening departure offers the best combination of darkness for concealment and favorable weather. You memorized all the schedules. Tucker asked, clearly impressed. Pete tapped his temple. Up here, yes, but I keep records to track any changes. Railroads adjust their schedules. You need to know when that happens. He pointed to different areas of the yard. The railroad bulls conduct their most thorough inspections during the 2:30 p.m. departure. Why? Because visibility's highest and management oversight is strongest. At night and in the early morning, it's a skeleton security crew, much easier to board undetected. The level of detail in Pete's knowledge was staggering. He knew which yard supervisors were likely to look the other way, and which ones would call the police. He knew which crews checked their trains thoroughly before departure and which ones did only cursory inspections. Information, Pete said, is the difference between riding safely to your destination and getting caught or worse. After breakfast, a simple meal of coffee and bread shared around the morning fire, Pete moved on to the next lesson, car selection. This is the most dangerous decision you'll make, he said bluntly. You choose wrong, you die. It's as simple as that. You walked along the edge of the yard as Pete pointed out different car types, explaining their characteristics. Empty boxcars are the best. They offer protection from the weather, good places to hide, and a level floor for sleeping. The problem is, they're also the first place the bulls look. Grain hoppers offer concealment but expose you to dust and temperature extremes. Plus, the grain dust can suffocate you in tunnels. Gondolas seem good until it rains, and then they're just bathtubs with you floating in them. Flat cars with machinery give you hiding spots, but no protection from the elements. The most surprising recommendation came when Pete pointed to a line of loaded flat cars carrying heavy equipment. These are the safest for avoiding bulls, he explained. Riders can hide behind the machinery while still maintaining escape routes. Bulls rarely climb up to check them. It's too much effort. His preferred strategy involved targeting cars positioned 15 to 20 positions back from the locomotive. Too close to the engine and the crew might spot you, Pete explained. Too far back and the coupling jerks can throw you off. The middle is the sweet spot. Refrigerator cars, or reefers in hobo parlance, earned a special mention. When they're empty, they're ideal. Good ventilation, insulated against the temperature, and minimal railroad supervision because they're not carrying expensive cargo anymore. The education continued throughout the day, moving from car selection to boarding techniques. Here, Pete was deadly serious. This is where men die, he said. Every year, thousands of hobos end up under the wheels. One mistake is all it takes. The technique was specific. You wait until the train reaches 8 to 12 miles per hour, fast enough that railroad security can't easily pursue on foot, but slow enough to board safely. You run alongside the selected car for 20 to 30 yards to match its speed. You grab the ladder rungs with both hands and pull yourself up in one smooth motion. Pete demonstrated on a slow-moving local train, making it look effortless despite his age. When he returned, he had each of you describe the exact sequence back to him. This is not something you get multiple attempts at, he reminded you. You practice it in your mind until it's automatic. By late afternoon, the lessons shifted to perhaps the most crucial skill of all, concealment once you're aboard. Getting on is half the battle, Pete said. Staying hidden for hundreds of miles is the other half. He showed you a dark blanket from his pack. You pull this over your body to blend in with the shadows. You position yourself on the side of the car that's facing away from stations and yard buildings. The railroad men checked the visible sides first, if at all. Movement discipline was paramount, remaining motionless during daylight hours, especially when passing stations or populated areas. Noise discipline was equally important. A single shout or laugh can give away a rider's position. The most dangerous moments, Pete continued, happen during station stops. That's when inspections happen, and that's when the bulls walk the train. This led to his next lesson: escape routes and hiding spots at major yards. Pete's knowledge here was encyclopedic. For each significant rail hub across the country, he could describe hiding spots with pinpoint accuracy. The Denver yard has a drainage culvert under Track 7 that provides concealment during inspections. The Chicago South yard has a gap in the fence behind the equipment shed that offers a quick exit. The Memphis yard has an abandoned signal box near the coal tower that can hide 3 men if you're desperate. The final lesson of the day covered something you hadn't considered: the physical demands of long-distance travel. Coast to coast is over 3,000 miles, Pete said. It takes planning. Food and water come first. Pete recommended carrying hardtack crackers, dried meat, and a water container made from a large tin can with a tight-fitting lid. Clothing should be in layers that can be adjusted for temperature changes, with a waterproof outer layer, usually canvas treated with linseed oil for waterproofing. Your basic kit, he said, laying out the essentials, should include a knife, rope, and matches in a waterproof container. For first aid, you need iodine, bandages, and a needle and thread for deep cuts. A blanket that's dark on one side and light on the other is good. Dark for hiding, light for reflecting the sun if you're overheating. As evening approached, Pete introduced you to another critical aspect of hobo transportation: the communication system. Along the pathways approaching the rail yard, he pointed out small symbols carved into fence posts and scratched onto water towers. These, he explained, are the hobo code, information shared between travelers about local conditions. A circle with 2 parallel lines means it's safe to camp nearby. An X with a dot indicates a dangerous area with hostile bulls. A zigzag arrow suggests you should get out of here quickly. A horizontal line with 3 vertical marks above it translates to "This town is dangerous." These symbols, Pete explained, create a nationwide intelligence network, updated regularly by travelers. Before entering a new town or yard, you check the code. It might just save your life. The next morning brought practical application. Pete had identified a freight train bound for St. Louis that was leaving at 10:00 a.m. It was a relatively safe train with multiple rideable cars and minimal security. "You'll ride the first 100 miles with me," Pete told your group. "After that, you're on your own to Louisville. We'll meet at the water tower east of the Louisville yard in 3 days." The approach to the train was methodical. Pete had you watch from concealment as the freight was assembled. He pointed out the bulls' positions, identified the safest cars, and established primary and backup boarding locations. Never commit to just one plan, he advised. Always have alternatives. When the train began to move, Pete timed your approach perfectly. One by one, your group boarded an empty boxcar about 18 cars back from the engine. The process was nerve-wracking but successful. There were no alarms, no shouts, no pursuit. Inside the boxcar, Pete continued teaching. He demonstrated how to secure yourself for sleep using rope harnesses tied to fixed points, preventing falls during sudden train movements. He showed you techniques for blocking the sliding doors partially open, enough for air, but not enough to be visible from the outside. The most important lesson, Pete said as the countryside rolled past the door, is weather management. The weather changes fast when you're moving 50 miles an hour. You learn that the weather presents constant challenges, requiring specific techniques for different seasonal conditions. Winter travel demands extra insulation and protection from a wind chill that can cause frostbite within minutes at train speeds. You wrap your feet in newspaper and rags, Pete demonstrated. Then you cover them with canvas. This creates makeshift boots with both insulation and water resistance. Summer requires protection from sun exposure and dehydration, with light-colored clothing and frequent water stops at railroad water towers. Always refill at water stops, Pete advised. You never know when the next chance will come. As the Missouri countryside rolled past, Pete shared his own story. Unlike many hobos who were forced onto the road by economic disaster, he had chosen this life after returning from the Great War. I couldn't settle, he explained simply. Something in me just kept moving. I've been on the rails for 21 years now. You have no family? Tucker asked. Pete's expression shifted subtly. I had a wife in Tulsa, a daughter too. The Spanish flu took them in 1919, while I was still overseas. He stared out the boxcar door. After that, there was no reason to stay anywhere. The admission created a moment of quiet understanding. Everyone around you had lost something: homes, jobs, families. The rails were both an escape and a destiny. Near Jefferson City, Pete prepared your group for independent travel. He quizzed each of you on route knowledge, emergency procedures, and the yard layouts in St. Louis and Louisville. Remember, he said as the train slowed for a crew change, giving him the opportunity to disembark. Information keeps you alive. Never board a train if you don't know where it's going. Never enter a yard without knowing the escape routes. With that, he was gone, slipping away as the train crawled through a small switching yard. Your group continued eastward, now applying Pete's lessons without his guidance. The responsibility felt heavy. As night fell, you found yourself checking and rechecking the techniques you'd learned: car position, concealment, security, and awareness. A midnight crew change in St. Louis became your first real test. Railroad bulls with flashlights walked the length of the train, checking cars, seemingly at random. Your group remained frozen in the shadows of your boxcar, barely breathing. The flashlight beam swept across the open door but didn't linger. When the train finally resumed its journey east, Tucker broke the tension with a whispered joke. I guess they don't care much about catching bankers these days. The laugh that rippled through your group felt like a release and a triumph. You were learning, adapting, and surviving. 2 days later, dusty and tired but successful, your group reached the Louisville yard. You found the water tower Pete had mentioned and waited. By sunset, he appeared, nodding with approval when he saw that all 5 of you had made it. Not bad, he said simply. Ready for the next lesson? As the Kentucky twilight deepened around you, Pete began explaining the intricacies of long-distance route planning. How to navigate from coast to coast using connecting trains, timing layovers and managing the complex web of America's rail system. The country had shrunk for you, transformed from an impossible wasteland of economic collapse into a navigable network. With Pete's knowledge, no destination seemed unreachable, no journey impossible. You thought back to October, to the man you were, trapped in a failing bank, watching your life collapse with the economy. That man couldn't imagine surviving a week without money. Now, months later, you understood what Jack had told you that first night. Systems matter more than dollars. Pay attention now, Pete said, spreading a hand-drawn map on the ground. This here's how you get from anywhere to anywhere in America without a cent to your name. And under the stars, surrounded by men who'd lost everything but their will to survive, you leaned forward to learn the next lesson. The summer heat shimmered above the rail yard in Louisville as Pete completed your route planning lesson. It was June of 1930, 8 months since you had lost everything in the crash. Your skin was now deeply tanned. Your once soft hands were calloused, and your city clothes had been replaced by durable work where acquired through trade and occasional purchases. "I've got word of something interesting," Pete told your group the next morning. "There's a big jungle forming outside of Spokane. It's not just a camp, but a real community organized and run by a woman they call Mother Jones." The labor organizer, Tucker asked. Pete shook his head. "A different Mother Jones. No relation as far as I know. But she's building something worth seeing, community systems, not just survival techniques." The prospect of heading west again didn't appeal to everyone. The Oklahoma brothers, Elma and Ray, decided to continue east toward New York. Tucker was torn between Chicago and his sister, or this new opportunity to learn. "What do you think, Boston?" Tucker asked you. "Is it worth checking out?" You looked to Jack, who's been unusually quiet. "I know of her," Jack finally said. "I met her in Seattle 2 years back. She's a smart woman, practical, not a dreamer or a preacher. If she's building a community, it'll be one that works." That settled it for you and Tucker. 2 days later, you were westbound with Jack and Pete, leaving Louisville on a fast freight headed for St. Louis, where you'd connect with the northern route. The journey west was different this time. With Pete's guidance, you traveled with a confidence that would have been unimaginable just months ago. You knew which trains to catch, which yards to avoid, and how to time your movement through dangerous territories. "You're not green anymore," Jack observed one evening as you all shared a meal beside the tracks in Nebraska. "You're starting to look like a proper rail rider." "He's still got banker written all over him," Pete joked, but there was a note of approval in his voice. The northwestern route took you through Montana's spectacular landscapes. Vast plains rising to meet distant mountains, and valleys cut by rivers that flashed silver in the summer sun. Despite the beauty, you were always aware of the human cost of the economic collapse. Every town showed signs of the Depression's grip: closed businesses, makeshift shelters, and long lines for what little relief was available. At water stops, you encountered other travelers, many of them new to the road, still learning the harsh lessons of survival without money. "It was like that my first year," Pete said, watching a young family struggle to make a shelter from canvas scraps near a water tower in Idaho. "The difference is there were fewer of us then. The resources weren't so stretched. You had become a teacher now as well as a student. You shared food procurement techniques with a former accountant from Philadelphia, and showed a young couple how to build a rain-resistant shelter using Willie's methods. This, you realized, was another aspect of the hobo community, the constant transfer of survival knowledge from the experienced to the novice. There were no schools, no books, just life-saving information passed from person to person. Information, as Pete liked to say, is the only wealth that grows when you give it away. You reached Spokane in late June. The hobo jungle Pete had mentioned wasn't hard to find. It had become almost legendary among rail riders. Located in a wooded area where Latta Creek meets the Spokane River, it was far larger and more organized than any camp you had seen before. From a distance, it looked almost like a small village. Smoke rose from multiple cooking fires, and structures of varying sophistication were arranged in rough rows. People moved with a sense of purpose rather than the aimless waiting that characterized many hobo camps. "Ho, the camp," Pete called as you approached the perimeter. 3 men stepped forward, a welcoming committee and a security check combined. Pete, Jack, one of the men broke into a grin. "I heard you might be coming this way." Information traveled faster than people in the hobo world, a fact that still surprised you. Boston Jim and Tucker, Jack introduced you. He learned food from me, shelter from Willie, and the rails from Pete. They're good men. This simple endorsement from trusted travelers was all the credential you needed. The security men nodded and gestured toward the camp center, mothers by the main fire. "The daily meeting starts in an hour. You're just in time." The jungle's layout revealed intelligent planning. Sleeping areas were separated from cooking zones. A washing area was established downstream from the water collection point, and latrines were dug far from both. Simple pathways connected the different areas, and someone had even erected rough signposts. "This place has changed since I was through in the spring," Pete murmured, clearly impressed. "It's getting organized." The camp's population was larger than you expected, at least 50 people, including a few women and even 3 children. Most surprising was the diversity. Besides the expected laborers and former factory workers, you spotted people whose bearing and speech suggested education and a previous status. A doctor, perhaps, a teacher, what might have been a former lawyer. The Depression had been a great equalizer. Former professionals now sat alongside lifelong laborers, all of them reduced to the same basic struggle for survival. At the camp center, a large fire pit was surrounded by log seating. Nearby stood a structure more sophisticated than the others, a small cabin built from salvaged lumber, its roof made from overlapping sheet metal pieces sealed with tar. A hand-painted sign beside the door read simply, "Office." A woman emerged from this cabin as you approached. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair cut practically short, and eyes that assessed you immediately. She might have been 50 or 60. Her actual age was masked by the weathering of an outdoor life. She carried herself with a natural authority. "Mother Jones," Pete said with a respectful nod. "Railroad Pete," she nodded in return, then looked to Jack. "Frying pan, it's been a while. 2 years," Jack confirmed, "in Seattle, and these would be." Her gaze shifted to you and Tucker. After the introductions, Mother Jones gestured toward the cabin. "The meeting's in an hour. Come and talk first." The cabin's interior was surprisingly organized. A table held what appeared to be camp records, notebooks, hand-drawn maps, and lists. Shelves made from fruit crates contained medical supplies, tools, and books, actual books, a rare sight in hobo camps. Most striking was a large canvas sheet hung on one wall, covered with names arranged in columns. The skills inventory, Mother explained, seeing your interest. Everyone who stays here lists their skills. It makes trading easier. She pointed to various sections: construction, medical, repair, food procurement, education, even entertainment. A community needs all types, she said simply. Strong backs are valuable, but so are strong minds. He's a former banker, Jack said. You nodded, wondering if this was a mark against you in a world where banks were despised for their role in the economic collapse. Good, she said unexpectedly. I need someone who understands numbers. Our bookkeeper left for harvest work last week, and just like that, you had a role. Mother Jones explained the camp's basic structure as you all settled on wooden crates that served as chairs. This isn't charity, she stated firmly. Everyone contributes and everyone benefits. 4 hours of daily community work are required from each person. Cooking, construction, security, gathering, whatever needs doing. She showed you a notebook tracking contributions. After your 4 hours, you work for yourself, finding food, improving your shelter, or earning trade goods. The system was simple but strict. The rules were equally straightforward. No stealing from community members, no violence except in self-defense, and no hoarding of critical resources. Any disputes went to a council for resolution. You got 3 warnings for minor infractions, then expulsion. There were no warnings for major violations, just immediate banishment. That seems harsh, Tucker commented. Winter's harsher, Mother replied without apology. The community survives because everyone pulls their weight. We can't carry those who won't try. The system's effectiveness was obvious. Despite the desperate times, the camp had achieved a level of stability that would impress professional organizers. There was food storage, water management, medical care, and even educational activities for the few children. New arrivals get 3 days, Mother continued. You show your value by then or you move on. It's not about what you were before. Doctor, lawyer, ditch digger, it doesn't matter. What can you contribute now? That's all that counts. As she spoke, a young man entered with a piece of paper. A message from the Portland jungle, he said. Canneries are hearing starting on Monday, 50 positions. Mother took the note and read it quickly. Confirmed. 2 sources came by different trains. She nodded. Post it. Relay it to the Yakima and Missoula camps. After he left, she explained, the information network is the most valuable resource we have. Jobs, railroad security changes, town attitudes, danger warnings, all shared between the camps. How far does the network reach? Pete asked. Coast to coast now. The messages take time. They move at the speed of trains and travelers, but they move. Sacramento knows what's happening in Chicago within a week. The camp meeting proved even more revealing about the community's structure. Nearly everyone attended, gathering around the central fire as evening approached. Mother Jones conducted the proceedings with quiet efficiency, beginning with new arrivals, including your group, and moving through various reports. A man designated as the food coordinator described recent procurement successes and challenges. A woman in charge of water reported on purification efforts. A serious-looking fellow with a medical bag, introduced as Doc Peterson, provided a health update, including a warning about contaminated water in a creek 10 miles north. Most interesting was the information exchange. Travelers who had recently arrived shared news from other regions, which towns were hostile to hobos, which rail yards had increased security, where could work be found, what crops would need harvesting and when. The Idaho potatoes are looking good, reported a sunburned man. They'll need pickers by August, paying 75 cents a day plus meals. This information was recorded in the community logbook, creating a constantly updated intelligence network that helped members find work and avoid danger. After the meeting, Mother Jones assigned you to help with the camp's record keeping, tracking food stores, work contributions, and skill exchanges. Tucker, who had worked as a carpenter before the crash, was directed to a shelter construction project. Rest today, she told you both. You start tomorrow. Pete, Jack, are you staying or passing through? I might stay a spell, Pete said. I've been on the move since spring. Jack nodded in agreement. I could use some still time. You were shown to an area where you could build temporary shelters. Several camp members offered materials and assistance, demonstrating the community's approach to new arrivals. You weren't given a shelter. You were given the means to create it yourself, along with knowledge from those who'd been there longer. By nightfall, you and Tucker had constructed a simple but effective linta using techniques learned from Willie, enhanced by local improvements for the specific conditions of the Spokane region. This is different from what I expected, Tucker admitted as you both settled in for the night. I thought hobos were just men riding trains looking for work. This is organized necessity, you replied, thinking of the lessons learned over 8 months on the road. Systems work better than individuals. Jack told me that my first week. I didn't really understand it until now. The next morning, you reported to Mother Jones's cabin to begin your assigned role. The camp's record-keeping system was surprisingly sophisticated, not just tracking resources, but coordinating complex exchanges of skills and labor. Tin Can Tom needs his shoes repaired, Mother explained, showing you a ledger. He's got skills fixing pots and containers. Doc Peterson needs his cooking pot fixed. So Tom fixes Doc's pot, and Doc repairs Tom's shoes. Everyone gets what they need without any money changing hands. Your banking background proved unexpectedly useful in organizing this barter economy. You developed a simple credit system where work hours were recorded and could be spent on community resources or other members' skills. 4 hours of chopping wood equals 1 basic meal or 1 hour of skilled repair work, you explained to Mother Jones. Medical care costs more because it's rarer. Teaching skills to others earns additional credit. She studied your system, then nodded her approval. Implement it. We'll test it for a week. Beyond the skill exchange, you discovered the camp's job referral network was equally organized. When word arrived that apple orchards in Washington needed harvest workers, Mother identified community members with agricultural experience and coordinated their group travel. Employers prefer hearing groups, she explained. There's less risk than with individual strangers. We send 5 or 10 workers together with experienced leaders. We build a reputation for reliability. Next season, they ask for our people specifically. The resource pooling extended beyond food and skills. The community maintained a tool library where essential items, hammers, saws, cooking pots, basic medical supplies, were available for checkout by any member who had contributed their required work hours. Clothing distribution operated similarly, with winter coats and boots allocated based on need and planned travel routes. Those heading north received warmer gear than those moving south. Nothing is wasted, Mother noted. Coats sitting unused while someone freezes makes no sense. Perhaps most impressive was the community fund. Small contributions from working members were pooled to purchase items that benefited everyone. Recently, they had acquired bulk medical supplies that would have been unaffordable for individuals. What about people who take advantage? You asked one evening as you helped Mother reconcile the day's work records. It must happen sometimes. Of course it does, she acknowledged. Human nature doesn't change just because times are hard. That's why we have the council system. The council consisted of 3 senior community members who heard disputes and enforced the rules. Punishments for violations included temporary exclusion from shared meals, assignment to undesirable work duties like latrine maintenance, or permanent banishment for serious offenses like theft or violence. Expulsion sounds extreme, you commented. Mother's expression hardened slightly. Winter's coming in a few months. Resources will get scarcer. If discipline breaks down, people die. It's as simple as that. One person stealing food might mean 3 others starve in February. You witnessed the council in action when 2 men came to blows over a missing knife. Evidence was presented and witnesses were questioned. The judgment was swift. The knife had to be returned, and both men were assigned to garbage detail for 3 days. A second offense means a week of garbage duty, the lead councilman warned. A third means you leave permanently. The threat worked because everyone understood the stark reality. Survival outside the community was significantly more difficult. The harsh discipline wasn't arbitrary cruelty. It was necessary for collective survival. Medical care represented one of the most critical community services, as professional health care was completely unavailable to homeless populations. Doc Peterson, you learned, was a veterinary assistant before the crash. He wasn't a physician, but he had a basic medical knowledge that was better than nothing. He'd organized a primitive medical system using his knowledge of veterinary medicine, folk remedies, and basic first aid techniques. The most common problems are foot-related, he explained when you visited the medical tent to inventory supplies. Infections from walking, trench foot from wet conditions. If you treat them early, they heal. If you wait too long, you might lose the foot, or worse. He maintained a supply of medicinal plants gathered from local areas, willow bark for pain relief, echinacea for immune system support, and plantain for wound treatment. When commercial medicines were available through purchase or trade, they were reserved for the most serious cases. We saved 3 lives last winter, Mother Jones told you. 2 from pneumonia, 1 from an infected wound. They would have died without community resources. No individual could have afforded the medicines. Security was another sophisticated system. Guard duty rotated among all able-bodied members with specific protocols for dealing with railroad security, local law enforcement, and hostile civilians. Everyone does their shift, explained Watchman Mike, who coordinated the security rotation. 2 hours every third day. It's a small price for safety. Guards were positioned at camp entrances and elevated observation points, using simple signal systems like whistle patterns and hand signals to alert the community to approaching threats. Emergency evacuation procedures ensured the camp could be abandoned quickly if necessary, with predetermined meeting points for regrouping. By your third week in the Spokane jungle, you had fully integrated into the community. Your record-keeping system had been implemented with adjustments based on practical experience. You'd learned new survival skills from various members, each an expert in their own domain. You'd contributed to shelter improvements, food procurement, and information gathering. One evening, as you sat with Jack, Pete, and Tucker near the main fire, Jack made an observation that struck you deeply. Notice something, Boston. You haven't touched money in nearly a month. You haven't needed it. It was true. The community's systems had provided everything necessary: food, shelter, security, even medical care when you developed a nasty cough that Doc Peterson treated with herbs and honey. It's a different kind of economy, Pete added, based on what actually matters: skills, labor, knowledge, not pieces of paper that lose their value overnight. Tucker, who had thrived in his carpentry role, nodded in agreement. My sister wrote from Chicago. Things are getting worse there. The soup lines are stretching for blocks and people are fighting over scraps. Here, everyone eats. We're not feasting, Jack acknowledged, but we're surviving with dignity. That night, in your improved shelter, now a small but sturdy structure built using community-supplied materials in exchange for your record-keeping work, you reflected on the transformation of your understanding. When you lost everything in the crash, you thought poverty meant the end of security, of community, of meaning. What you discovered instead was that money was only one system for organizing human cooperation, and perhaps not the most resilient one. The hobo communities had created alternative systems for food, shelter, transportation, healthcare, security, and even justice that functioned without currency. These were systems based on direct contribution, visible to all, systems where wealth was measured in skills shared, work performed, and knowledge passed on. As you drifted toward sleep, you thought about writing to your parents. They still believed you were dead or lost. It was easier than explaining you'd become a hobo. But perhaps they could understand this. You weren't just surviving. You were part of building something that worked when everything else had failed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Mother Jones had asked you to help establish a satellite camp network, smaller outposts positioned along major railroad lines that would provide rest stops, supply caches, and communication links for traveling members. The work continued, and the systems grew stronger. And somewhere in America, the economy continued its free fall. But here, in this unlikely community of the displaced and dispossessed, people had found a different kind of wealth. The Spokane River glittered with the early morning sunlight as you finished the satellite camp inventory. It was September of 1930, and the first hints of fall color were touching the trees surrounding the main jungle. Nearly 3 months had passed since you arrived at Mother Jones's community, and in that time, your role had expanded from basic record keeping to helping coordinate the growing network of camps. The numbers look solid, Mother Jones said, reviewing your latest report. We have 12 satellite locations established, with 4 more planned before the snow flies. The satellite camp network had become your primary responsibility. These were smaller outposts positioned along major railroad lines that provided rest stops, supply caches, and communication links for traveling community members. Each one was strategically located a day's journey from the next, creating a chain of safe havens that stretched for hundreds of miles. The Yakima camp needs more medical supplies, you pointed out, indicating a note from your most recent inspection trip. And the Missoula outpost reports increased railroad security. They've had to move their location twice. Mother nodded, making her own notes. Winter's coming. Everything gets harder. The change of seasons loomed like a physical presence over the community. Summer's relative abundance was ending, and food sources were becoming scarcer. The temperatures dropped sharply at night, and rain fell more frequently, testing the shelter constructions. We've got maybe 6 weeks before the first snow, Doc Peterson estimated during that evening's community meeting. We need to finish winterizing all the shelters by the end of the month. The winterization efforts had been underway since late August, reinforcing shelters, stockpiling firewood, preserving food, and repairing winter clothing. The rhythm of community work had shifted from expansion to preparation. Your shelter, once a simple structure, had evolved into a well-insulated cabin built against the hillside. The earth provided natural insulation on 3 sides, while the front wall, facing south to catch the winter sun, was a patchwork of salvaged lumber, tar paper, and canvas, all meticulously sealed against drafts. Not bad for a banker, Tucker joked as he helped you install a small wood-burning stove fashioned from an oil drum. The design incorporated lessons from both Willie and the camp's collective knowledge: efficient airflow, heat reflection, and most importantly, proper ventilation to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning. Check the chimney seal again, you insisted, remembering Willie's warning. I'd rather be cold than dead. The stove installation was part of a larger winterization system. Around it, you had arranged large cans filled with sand that would absorb heat during evening fires and radiate warmth through the night, conserving precious fuel. The entire community was transforming as winter approached. Food procurement shifted from fresh sources to preservation and storage. Teams worked in coordination, some gathering late fall apples and root vegetables from abandoned orchards and farms, while others smoked meat or dried fruits over carefully maintained fires. Your banking background had proven unexpectedly valuable in resource management. Mother Jones had put you in charge of the winter food allocation system, calculating minimum nutritional needs, projecting supplies through April, and developing a distribution plan that ensured fair shares based on work contribution. 800 calories per day minimum, Doc Peterson advised as you worked on the calculations. Below that, people start weakening and get sick easier. Current projections show 1,000 calories daily through February, you told him, reviewing your inventory records. After that, it depends on what we can still forage and what comes in through trade. The community's population had stabilized at around 60 permanent members, with another 20 or 30 transient residents who stayed for days or weeks before moving on. Many were heading south ahead of winter, following the remnants of harvest work into California and Arizona. Others, like you, Jack, Pete, and Tucker, had committed to wintering in the Maine jungle. The decision wasn't made lightly. Winter survival required resources, planning, and a community willing to share both. Ever wintered outdoors before? Pete asked one evening as your core group gathered around the main fire. You shook your head. The closest was a camping trip in Maine when I was 16. My dad called it off after one cold night. It's not just the cold that kills you, Pete said matter-of-factly. It's the wet. Wet clothes, wet bedding, wet firewood. You stay dry, you live. You get wet and stay wet, you die. Jack nodded in agreement. I lost 3 good men in the Montana winter of '27. Their shelter collapsed in heavy snow while they slept. By morning, they were frozen solid. These weren't ghost stories meant to frighten. They were survival lessons delivered with deadly seriousness. Winter wasn't just uncomfortable, it was lethal to the unprepared. The transportation network changed with the seasons as well. Railroad Pete led workshops on winter travel techniques. How to ride safely when ice coated the ladder rungs, how to avoid freezing in open cars, and which routes remained passable when snow blocked the mountain passes. Winter riding's different, he explained to a group of newer travelers. In the summer, you worry about bulls and falls. In the winter, you worry about freezing to death between stops. He demonstrated how to wrap feet in newspaper and rags, then cover them with canvas to create makeshift boots that provided both insulation and water resistance. He showed how to create windbreaks in open cars using tarpaulins or even cardboard. Most importantly, he emphasized when not to travel. In blizzard conditions, you stay put. Below zero at night, you stay put. If heavy snowfall is expected, you stay put. Pride gets you killed in the winter. A smart hobo knows when to hole up and wait. As community coordinator for the satellite camps, you traveled regularly, inspecting facilities, delivering supplies, and maintaining the information network. Your most recent journey took you to the Coeur d'Alene outpost, where 5 community members maintained a way station for travelers between Spokane and Missoula. We're getting more traffic from the east, reported Sadie, the outpost leader. She was a former school teacher from Minneapolis who now managed the camp with military precision. Folks are fleeing Chicago and Detroit. The cities are death traps this winter. No jobs, no relief, buildings without heat. You updated your notebook with her information. How are your supplies holding up? They're tight but adequate. We need more medical iodine and bandages. We've got plenty of firewood and the water sources are secure. The conversation was practical, focused on survival metrics. Throughout the Hobo network, information was traded with the same seriousness as food or medicine. Railroad securities increased along the northern route. You told her in return. Union Pacific added bulls at 3 yards between here and Missoula. The switching patterns have changed, too. Pete mapped the new schedules. You shared Pete's carefully drawn schedule chart, which Sadie copied into the outpost logbook. This information would be passed to every traveler heading east, potentially saving them from capture or worse. On your return to the Maine jungle, you were accompanied by a new arrival to the network, a former factory foreman from Detroit named Ellis, who had lost his job when the automotive plants began massive layoffs. His manufacturing experience had already proven valuable in designing improved stoves for the satellite camps. I never thought I'd end up here, Ellis confessed, as you walked the rails together. I had a house, a car, a savings account. It was all gone in 6 months. The banking collapse took mine in 6 hours, you replied. At least you had a longer runway. Ellis laughed, a harsh sound with little humor. That's one way to look at it. Your setup in Spokane is more organized than the factory I managed. How'd that happen with no money and no resources? You considered this as you walked. Systems, you finally answered. Everyone contributing what they know. A banker's resource management, an engineer's shelter design, a doctor's medical knowledge, a factory foreman's production efficiency. You take away our money, but we still have our skills. Back at the main jungle, you found increased activity. The community was preparing for the first major storm of the season, which was forecast to arrive within 48 hours. Have all the satellites reported in? Mother Jones asked when you checked in. All secure. Coeur d'Alene needs medical supplies. I've noted the quantities. You handed over your report. They're seeing more Easterners coming west. It's a bad situation in the big cities. Mother nodded grimly. I'm getting the same reports from all directions. The cities are becoming death traps. No jobs, relief running out, people freezing in unheated tenements. The contrast with your own community was stark. Despite having no conventional wealth, you had created systems that worked. Food, shelter, medical care, security, even a primitive form of governance. The hobo jungle, once just a temporary stopping place, had evolved into something approaching a functional society. That evening, Mother Jones called an emergency meeting. The approaching storm was more severe than initially forecast, potentially the first blizzard of the season. All community resources had to be directed toward preparation. Extra firewood needs to be gathered and covered, she directed. The water barrels need to be filled before the streams freeze. All shelters must be inspected for weak points. The buddy system is in place. Everyone checks on 2 neighbors and gets checked by 2 others. The community mobilized with practiced efficiency. Work groups formed spontaneously, wood-gathering teams, shelter inspection crews, and food preparation units. There was no panic, just purposeful activity. You were assigned to coordinate the satellite camp communications, ensuring all outposts received the warning and preparation instructions. Tucker headed a shelter reinforcement team. Jack and Pete joined a group setting up emergency shelters for any travelers who might be caught in the open when the storm hit. By nightfall, the first snowflakes began to fall. The wind rose, carrying a biting chill that cut through inadequate clothing. Inside your shelter, the stove radiated a welcome heat as you reviewed your emergency protocols one final time. A knock at your door revealed Doc Peterson making his rounds before the storm hit full force. Just checking supplies, he explained, entering and stomping snow from his boots. Everyone gets a basic medical kit tonight. Iodine, bandages, willow bark for pain and fever. He handed you a small packet wrapped in waxed paper. Keep it dry and keep it accessible. If someone gets hurt during the storm, help might not reach them quickly. The storm arrived with its full fury around midnight. The wind howled through the trees, snow driving horizontally, and the temperatures plummeting. Inside your shelter, the stove struggled against the cold, forcing you to feed it more precious wood than planned. Sleep came in snatches, interrupted by the need to maintain the fire and check for snow buildup that might collapse the roof. During one such check, you spotted a faint light moving through the blizzard, a lantern carried by the night watch, checking for travelers or community members caught outside. Morning brought an eerie stillness. The storm had paused temporarily, though dark clouds promised more to come. You opened your door to a transformed landscape. The snow was 2 feet deep in places, with drifts twice that height against structures. The temperature was well below freezing, your breath creating clouds in the still air. The buddy system proved its worth immediately. 3 shelters had suffered damage: a collapsed section of a roof, a door torn free by the wind, and a chimney blocked by snow. In each case, the assigned buddies discovered the problem before it became life-threatening. One outbuilding used for tool storage hadn't fared as well. Its roof had completely collapsed under the snow's weight. A work crew was already salvaging what they can, prioritizing items essential for survival. It could have been worse, Mother Jones observed as she made her inspection rounds. Everyone's accounted for, no serious injuries. The damage can be repaired. The storm's brief lull allowed for essential work. Paths were cleared between shelters. Roofs were reinforced against the coming snowfall, and additional firewood was gathered and distributed. By midday, when the blizzard resumed, the community was better prepared. The following 3 days established a pattern: intense storm periods followed by brief clearings that allowed for essential movement and work. The community adapted quickly, developing new systems for these conditions. Ropes were strung between buildings to prevent people from getting lost in whiteout conditions. Snow was collected and melted for water when reaching the river became dangerous. Food preparation shifted to a central location where one large fire could serve many, conserving fuel. On the 4th day, as the storm finally broke, the traveler arrived, half frozen and exhausted, having walked the final miles when his train stopped due to snow-blocked tracks. He was quickly brought to the medical tent, where Doc Peterson treated him for frostbite and exposure. "Chicago's finished," the man reported when he'd recovered enough to speak. "No work, no food, no hope. People are dying in the streets. The cops are beating anyone who complains. I came west looking for something better." His story was similar to others you had heard. Major cities were collapsing under the Depression's weight, and conventional support systems were failing completely. The contrast with your community became even clearer. That evening, as you made your rounds checking on satellite camp communications, you found Tucker working on an improved snow shovel design. "I'm thinking about spring," he said unexpectedly. "It's a little early for that," you replied, gesturing toward the snow-covered landscape. "Winter's just starting." Tucker smiled. "I'm not planning to plant flowers, I'm planning to build." He showed you a rough sketch, an expanded community layout with additional structures, improved water management, and even small garden plots. "You're thinking long-term," you observed, "beyond just survival. The way I see it, this crash isn't ending anytime soon. It might be years before there's regular work again. Maybe what we're building here isn't just temporary. Maybe it's a different way to live." The idea took root in your mind. You had been focused on immediate survival for so long that thinking beyond the next season felt almost revolutionary. Yet the systems you had helped create weren't just stopgap measures. They were functional alternatives to conventional economics. Later, you discussed the concept with Mother Jones as you updated the community records. Tucker's talking about permanence. You told her about expanding beyond survival. She considered this without surprise. It's a natural progression. First you survive, then you start thinking about living. She gestured toward her records. Why do you think I keep such detailed systems? This isn't just about getting through this winter. It's about creating something that lasts. A permanent hobo community. The idea still sounded strange to your ears. Call it what you want. A community that works without money. People contributing skills instead of trading dollars. It doesn't matter if the economy recovers tomorrow. What we've built here works. That night, as another storm gathered on the horizon, you reviewed your journey from Boston Jim, the displaced banker, to a community coordinator. In less than a year, you had mastered survival systems that would have seemed impossible in your previous life. Food procurement without money, shelter construction from waste materials, transportation networks using freight trains, and community support structures that functioned better than many conventional towns. The banking collapse that destroyed your old life had, ironically, helped create something potentially more durable. While the monetary economy continued its freefall, you had helped build alternative systems based on direct contribution, practical skills, and community cooperation. As you added another log to the stove and prepared for the coming storm, you wondered what your former banking colleagues would make of all this. They'd probably consider it primitive, desperate. They wouldn't see what you now recognized, that the hobo communities had created something the failed economy couldn't, a system that kept people alive when everything else fell apart. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the first snowflakes of the new storm. Inside, the stove radiated steady heat. Your shelter stood solid against the elements, and your community prepared with calm efficiency. These weren't just survival techniques. They were the foundation of a different way of living. And as winter settled over the hobo jungle, you found yourself strangely at peace. The journey from bank teller to hobo hadn't been easy, but it had led to an unexpected destination. It wasn't just survival, but a kind of freedom you never knew existed. The coldest January in 40 years. That's what the old-timers were saying as the hobo jungle struggled through the heart of winter. It was 1931, and your transformation from James Sullivan, bank teller, to Boston Jim, community coordinator, was complete. The calendar said you'd been on the road for 15 months, but it felt like several lifetimes. Morning arrived with a brutal clarity, 20 degrees below zero, according to the thermometer Doc Peterson had salvaged from an abandoned ranger station. Inside your shelter, the stove had burned down to embers overnight, despite your efforts to keep it fed. Your breath hung visible in the frigid air, and the water bucket by the door had a thick skin of ice. Another day in paradise, you muttered, forcing yourself out of the relative warmth of your blankets to restart the fire. The mid-January cold snap had stretched the community's resources to the breaking point. 3 consecutive weeks of below-zero temperatures had consumed firewood at twice the projected rate. Food stores were dwindling faster than expected as bodies burned precious calories just fighting the cold. The satellite camp network had become fragmented as snow blocked the rail lines and made foot travel between locations nearly impossible. Outside, the world was eerily beautiful. Trees encased in ice glittered in the morning sun, and snowdrifts had been sculpted by the wind into fantastic shapes. The river was partially frozen into abstract formations. It would have been picturesque if it weren't actively trying to kill you. Movement around the camp was minimal, limited to essential tasks like gathering firewood, melting snow for water, and checking on neighbors. Everyone's face showed the same strained determination. This wasn't just about individual survival anymore. It was about preserving what you had all built together. You made your way to Mother Jones's cabin for the morning coordination meeting. Inside, the core leadership group had already gathered. Mother herself, Doc Peterson, Pete, Jack, and several others who managed critical systems. The mood was somber. "We've lost contact with the Coeur d'Alene outpost," reported Watchman Mike. "No messages for 5 days. The trails are impossible." "Missoula reports illness," added Doc Peterson. "Sounds like influenza. 3 cases so far." Mother Jones absorbed this information without any visible reaction, then turned to you. Inventory update. You consulted your notebooks, the most accurate record of the community's resources. Firewood is at a critical level at the current consumption rate, with 3 weeks remaining. Food stores are adequate but strained, with 800 calories per person daily through February if nothing changes. Medical supplies are low, especially for respiratory issues, which we'll need if that flu reaches us, Doc interjected. The crisis wasn't unexpected. You had all planned for winter hardship, but the reality was still brutal. Priorities, Mother said firmly. First, containment. No travel to or from Missoula until we know what we're dealing with. Message relay only, no physical contact. Doc nodded in agreement. Second, conservation. We need to reduce individual fires. Consolidate people into communal warming spaces when possible. It saves wood and shares body heat. Third, you added, food redistribution. We need to maintain minimum calories for those doing essential physical work while ensuring everyone gets enough to survive. The meeting continued, adjusting the systems that had kept you alive so far. This was the hobo community at its most effective, practical problem solving without panic or despair. As you left, Jack fell in beside you. "Do you remember your first night on the road back in Chicago? You smiled despite everything. I thought I was going to die before morning." Most do their first winter, but you learned. Jack gestured around at the functioning community. "And now you're teaching." The compliment caught you off guard. You'd been so focused on the immediate challenges that you hadn't fully registered how far you'd come, from a helpless novice to someone others relied on for survival knowledge. That afternoon, you implemented the new conservation measures. The central meeting area was transformed into a communal warming space with 3 large stoves providing heat. Surrounding shelters would maintain minimal heating during the day, with resources concentrated on keeping sleeping areas warm at night. "It's like a prairie dog town," Tucker observed as people gathered in the central space, bringing work projects, cooking pots, and even makeshift games to pass the time. Everyone was huddled together underground during the winter. The comparison was apt. There was something primally comforting about the shared warmth, both physical and social. Children played in one corner while adults repaired clothing, carved tools, or simply talked in low voices. Someone produced a harmonica, and soft music filled the space. It was a stark contrast to what you'd heard about the conditions in the cities, where isolation compounded the suffering. Here, hardship had forced communion rather than separation. The next morning brought news that drove home the value of your community systems. A traveler staggered into camp, half frozen and incoherent with the cold. He was quickly brought to the medical tent, where Doc Peterson treated him for severe frostbite and hypothermia. When he could finally speak, his story sent a chill through the camp that had nothing to do with the temperature. The Hooverville outside Seattle collapsed, he reported. There was no organization, no preparation. When the cold hit, it was every man for himself, fighting over firewood, stealing food. Then the influenza came. He paused, his eyes haunted. There were 200 people and maybe 30 survived. The news spread quickly, reinforcing the seriousness of your situation. That night, Mother Jones called a community meeting to address the growing fears. What happened in Seattle could happen here. She acknowledged frankly, if we abandon our systems, if we stop working together, if we panic. She looked around at the gathered faces, illuminated by the firelight. But we won't, because we've built something stronger than just a collection of individuals. We've built a community that functions like a single organism, each part supporting the others. Her words strengthened the collective resolve. The next day, despite the temperatures remaining below zero, work parties formed with renewed purpose, gathering additional firewood from increasingly distant sources, reinforcing shelters, and checking on the elderly and ill. You found yourself working alongside Ellis, the former factory foreman, breaking up an abandoned shed 5 miles from camp for its lumber. I heard you were setting up rationing changes, he said as you both pried boards loose from the frozen ground. Calorie banking, you confirmed. Those doing heavy physical work get additional rations but bank a portion for those who can't work due to age or illness. Everyone stays alive and the work gets done. Ellis nodded approvingly. Production efficiency with human values. That's better than any factory I ever ran. By early February, new challenges emerged. The influenza reported in Missoula reached your main camp despite all the precautions. The first cases appeared in the eastern section of the jungle, primarily among newer arrivals with less robust shelters. Doc Peterson immediately implemented quarantine measures, creating a separate treatment area and assigning specific caregivers who didn't circulate with the general population. His knowledge of basic infection control, likely learned during the 1918 pandemic, proved invaluable. Basic principles, he explained during an emergency meeting: isolation of the sick, hand-washing between patients, masks for caregivers, and limited contact. Resources were diverted to medical needs. The best shelters were assigned to the ill, extra firewood was allocated to maintain healing temperatures, and food shares were adjusted to provide more calories to the sick and their caregivers. You found yourself working triple shifts, maintaining resource records, coordinating between the healthy and quarantined areas, and still participating in essential gathering work. Sleep became a luxury measured in hours rather than nights. "You're pushing too hard," Jack warned one evening, finding you still working by candlelight long after most had gone to sleep. "Exhaustion makes you vulnerable. The body can't fight off illness without rest." You knew he was right, but there was just so much to manage. The influenza had now affected nearly a quarter of the camp. Food reserves were declining faster than projected, and communication with 3 satellite camps had been lost entirely. The system's only as good as the people running it, Jack reminded you, and people need sleep. That night, you finally allowed yourself 8 full hours of rest. You woke feeling more clear-headed, recognizing the wisdom in Jack's warning. Survival required sustainable effort, not heroic burnout. Mid-February brought the first hint of improvement. Daytime temperatures occasionally rose above zero, and the sun was noticeably stronger when it appeared. The influenza reached its peak and began to recede, though not without cost. 7 community members had died despite all efforts, mostly the elderly or those already weakened by months of hardship. Each death was marked by a simple ceremony. The bodies were buried in ground laboriously excavated from the frozen earth. Possessions were redistributed according to community guidelines, and names were recorded in Mother Jones's logbook, a memorial and a reminder. We lost fewer than most places, Doc Peterson observed after the last burial. The Seattle Hooverville lost nearly 80%. We lost less than 15% of those who got sick, and only about 5% of the total population. The numbers were cold comfort to those who knew the deceased, but they validated the community's approaches. Your systems had kept the majority alive through conditions that had decimated less organized groups. By late February, contact was re-established with most of the satellite camps. The news was mixed. Significant hardship everywhere, some locations abandoned entirely, but overall survival rates were much higher than in conventional Hoovervilles or urban slums. The railroad bulls found the Yakima outpost, reported a messenger who had managed the difficult journey. They destroyed everything, but our people had a warning from the communication network. They relocated according to emergency protocols. There were no casualties. March arrived with alternating thaws and freezes. The worst of the winter had passed, though the danger remained. Food stores were critically low, with many days reduced to minimum rations. But the signs of the coming spring brought renewed energy to the community. Planning began for what was once unimaginable, a second year of permanent settlement. "We need to start the seedbeds soon," advised an elderly woman who had joined the community after losing her farm to a bank foreclosure. "We can grow vegetables on that south slope. There's good sun there." Others began discussing expanded shelter areas, improved water management systems, and even small-scale manufacturing of essential items. What began as emergency survival had evolved into something approaching a permanent alternative society. One unusually warm day in mid-March, you hiked to a ridge overlooking the jungle. The community had changed dramatically since your arrival 9 months ago. Crude temporary shelters had evolved into more permanent structures. Pathways had become quasi-streets, and garden plots were being prepared in sunny areas. It resembled nothing so much as a frontier town taking shape on the American edge. Jack found you there, gazing down at the settlement. "Thinking deep thoughts, Boston?" he asked, using your hobo name as he always did now. "I'm thinking about banks, actually," you replied. "About money. About what happened when it all collapsed." Jack waited, knowing there was more. "We lost everything that supposedly mattered," you continued. Jobs, savings, status, security. And then we built something that works better in some ways. It's not easier or more comfortable, but it's more direct, more honest. There are no layers between contribution and reward. Jack nodded. You work, you eat. You help others, they help you. It's as simple as that. You both stood in a comfortable silence, watching people move purposefully through the community below. I got a letter, Jack said eventually. A friend in Washington says the government's finally noticing the scale of this mess. They're talking about relief programs, work projects. There might be jobs coming. The news should have been welcome, but you felt strangely ambivalent. Do you think people will leave, go back to conventional jobs if they appear? Some will, Jack acknowledged. It's hard to blame them, but others. He gestured toward the jungle. Some might stay and keep building this. It's not just a survival strategy anymore. It's a different way of living. By early April, the community faced a new kind of challenge, opportunity. As Jack had predicted, government relief efforts were finally expanding. News arrived of work programs in various regions, and private industry showed faint signs of recovery in some sectors. For the first time in months, there were options beyond mere survival. Mother Jones called a community meeting to address the changing situation. Nearly 100 people gathered, the core community plus newcomers who had arrived as the weather improved. Each of you has choices to make, she told the assembled group. Some of you came here because you had nowhere else to go. Now there might be alternatives. No one should feel obligated to stay if better options appear. A murmur ran through the crowd, a discussion, not a discord. But she continued, what we've built here isn't just a temporary shelter from the economic storm. It's a community with its own values, its own systems, its own strengths. For those who choose to stay, there's a future here too. The following days brought numerous conversations about what that future might look like. Some envisioned a permanent settlement evolving into a self-sufficient town. Others suggested a hybrid model, community systems combined with conventional work when it was available. Still, others saw value in maintaining the core jungle as a training center, teaching survival skills to those still struggling across the country. You found yourself increasingly drawn to this last vision, remembering your own journey from a helpless bank teller to a capable survivor. The systems you had learned, food procurement, shelter construction, transportation networks, and community organization, represented a body of knowledge too valuable to be lost. On a bright morning in late April, exactly 18 months after Black Tuesday had ended your banking career, you met with Mother Jones to discuss your decision. I want to establish a training program. You explained, formal instruction in all 4 survival systems. We can take what we've learned through hard experience and make it accessible to newcomers. She listened without interruption as you outlined your vision. 2-week intensive courses covering essential techniques, reference materials documenting successful approaches, and even a certification process for those who mastered the core skills. Education was my first career, Mother Jones revealed when you finished. Before the labor organizing, before all of this, I taught school in Tennessee for 12 years. This surprised you. She had never spoken much about her past. People need to learn again, she continued. Not just reading and figures, but real survival. How to feed themselves, how to build, how to move through a world that has stopped making sense. She nodded decisively. Use the northeast clearing for your school. I'll help you design the program. By May, your training initiative had taken shape. The first class included 15 students, some from nearby Hoovervilles, others sent by relief agencies that had recognized the jungle's superior survival rates. The curriculum drew on the collective knowledge of the community's experts. Jack teaching food procurement, Willie, who had returned from Tucson as promised, handling shelter construction, Pete managing transportation instruction, and various community members covering specialized skills. Your role was coordination and the fundamentals, the underlying principles that made the Hobo systems work when conventional approaches failed. The Depression didn't just take our jobs and savings, you told your first class. It stripped away our illusions and showed us how fragile our supposed security really was. But it also revealed what's actually valuable: practical knowledge, community cooperation, and adaptable systems. As spring advanced towards summer, you often reflected on the staggering distance you had traveled since that October morning in Chicago. The desperate, bewildered banker who had lost everything had become something entirely different. He wasn't just a survivor, but a builder, someone who helped create systems rather than merely serving them. One evening, a spectacular sunset painted the Spokane River in golden crimson. Jack found you by the water's edge. A year ago, you wouldn't have recognized yourself now, he observed. You smiled, acknowledging the truth in his words. I still can't believe the things we've built with nothing. When I think about how helpless I felt that first night. Everyone starts helpless, Jack said simply. Children, newcomers, folks who have lost their way. The question is whether they find teachers or just fellow victims. The river flowed past, constant despite the tumultuous changes in the human world on its banks. You thought about all the teachers you had found on this journey. Jack with his food procurement wisdom, Willie and his shelter engineering, Railroad Pete and his transportation network, Mother Jones and her community organization. Each of them had shared systems that worked without money, without conventional resources. The crash wasn't the end, you said quietly. It was the beginning of something else, something we're still building. Jack nodded, understanding. Systems fail, people adapt. New systems emerge. He skipped a stone across the water's surface. It's been happening since the first cave dwellers figured out fire. That night, as you settled into your now comfortable shelter, you found yourself oddly grateful for the economic disaster that had forced this journey upon you. The collapse had cleared away a world built on illusion and revealed one based on direct reality, where value came from contribution, not speculation, where wealth was measured in knowledge and relationships, not paper certificates, and where security was derived from the community rather than from institutions. Outside, the spring night was alive with sounds, frogs calling from the river, the wind in the new leaves, distant conversations from the main camp. Inside, your shelter stood solid against any weather that might come. Your body, once soft from office work, had been transformed by physical labor into something stronger, more resilient. The Hobo systems had done more than just keep you alive through America's worst economic disaster. They had revealed a truth that was hidden during times of prosperity, that human ingenuity and cooperation can create abundance even when conventional wealth disappears. As sleep approached, you reached for the small notebook beside your bed, the one where you recorded the day's events and insights. Tonight's entry was brief but encompassed everything the journey had taught you. The railroad taught us that survival isn't about what you own. It's about what you know, who you trust, and how much you're willing to share when times get tough. We built something out here that the government couldn't, a system that kept people alive when the whole country was falling apart. You closed the notebook and settled back, listening to the river's distant murmur. Unlike your comfortable bed in Chicago that seemed a lifetime ago, this simple pallet represented something earned through knowledge and effort rather than merely purchased. As you drifted toward sleep, there was a deep satisfaction in knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, recovery or continued hardship, you now possessed systems that couldn't be taken away by any economic collapse. The Hobos' survival techniques of the Great Depression proved that human ingenuity and community cooperation could sustain life even under the most desperate conditions. These methods, food procurement without money, shelter construction from waste materials, transportation networks using freight trains, and community support systems, provided a blueprint for survival that remained effective long after the Depression ended. As you sank deeper into your pillow, remember that even in your most comfortable moments, you're never more than a generation away from needing these forgotten skills that once kept millions alive when the modern world failed.